In 2003, massive wildfires burned in Southern California. More than 300,000 acres burned, more than 1,000 homes were destroyed, and more than 20 people died. The fires mostly burned in the hills and mountains surrounding Los Angeles and San Diego. What kinds of vegetation grow on those hills? Not too many trees. It's mostly shrubs and grasses. We call this kind of vegetation chaparral. We're going to see one of the places that burned. La Ventura Nature Reserve is located in some of this chaparral habitat. Part of the reserve burned in 2003, but fortunately the main research labs did not. The scientists here would like you to find out if their buildings are going to burn down in the future and if there's anything they can do to prevent this. We want to show you around the reserve to help you understand the research we're doing. Protecting the lab won't do any good if there's no reserve left to study. As we look around, check out your notebook. It will have information you might find useful about what we've discussed. When new notes are written in your notebook, the icon will blink. What's special about the chaparral? Well, it's only found in a few places around the world, where the summers are hot and dry, and the winters are cool and wet. This sort of climate is called a Mediterranean climate. Chaparral is a plant community composed of shrubs and bushes. The plants that live here are drought tolerant. This community covers most of the hillsides and mountains in Southern California. Plants that live here deal with a lot of water stress during the long dry summer. What tactics can they use? Well, one way is to just not be around at all during the dry summer. Annuals are plants that grow for only 1 year. They sprout seeds during the wet winter, bloom, set seed, and die by summer. What about perennials, plants that live for more than 1 year? They use other strategies to survive the summer drought. Some of these perennials store food in specialized underground organs, like taproots, bulbs, or tubers. This way, the above-ground parts can die during the drought, but the plant will stay dormant underground until the rains come back. A lot of woody shrubs in the chaparral have small, stiff, tough leaves that don't wilt. This allows the plant to keep photosynthesizing even when there's very little water. These stiff leaves are often covered with a waxy coating which helps seal in water. These plants are called sclerophylls, meaning hard leaves. Other shrubs have different mechanisms to reduce water loss from their leaves. Lighter colored grayish leaves reflect more light, which keeps the leaves from losing too much water through evaporation. Hairy leaves serve a similar purpose. Finely divided or very small leaves also help reduce the amount of leaf surface exposed to the glaring light of the sun. Let's look at some of these shrubs. Can you label each shrub with its proper tag? We've added some helpful pages to your notebook. You'll find a worksheet with some information about these plants. You'll also find a glossary of botanical terms. Good job! The plants you've identified are now described in your notebook. Hey, here's an annual I'm sure you've seen before. It looks like it's pretty well adapted for dry summers. It has silvery, finely divided leaves. Now, how would you describe this plant to a biologist for her to know what plant you were talking about? Well, it's kind of like a game of 20 questions. We ask a series of yes or no questions to narrow down the possible plants you might be describing. What questions could I ask about this plant if I wanted to know which plant you were describing? Answer these questions and we'll figure it out. Let's try playing 20 questions the other way. Here are 5 plants that you can choose from. Pick one of them. I'll ask you questions and you'll answer yes or no based on the plant you chose. If you answer the questions correctly, the picture on the right will match your plant. If the two pictures don't match, you answered a question wrong. Click Reset and try again. We can write this down as a dichotomous key. Dichotomous means divided into two choices. In a dichotomous key, we choose between two choices at a time, like answering yes or no to a question in 20 questions. We call each pair of choices a couplet. Here's the dichotomous key I just used to identify your plant. It's in your notebook as well. Now it's your turn. Use this big key to identify this plant. The key is made up of a series of couplets. As you click on the correct choice in the current pair, the next couplet will appear. The last choice you make identifies the plant. No? Try again. Try again. Good job. This is Toyon, or California holly. Hollywood was named for these plants. Now we're moving into the part of the reserve that burned. This is what the area looked like before the fire. The plants in the chaparral are adapted for fire. What does that mean? Well, the plants of the chaparral not only use fire as part of their life cycles, but many of the plants actually encourage it. How can a plant encourage fire? Think about building a campfire. Would you want to use dry, dead wood or fresh green leaves? You choose dry wood because it burns better. Could a plant do something like this to make itself more flammable? Many of the shrubs here keep their dead branches, making these shrubs very dense and pokey to walk through. When a fire comes, these dense, dead branches act as firewood. They burn hot and fast. What happens after a fire burns down the chaparral? Well, as you can see, there's really nothing left above ground after a fire. Does this mean all the plants that were here are dead? No. There are still a lot of things underground. In fact, a lot of the tactics that help these plants survive the summer drought help these plants return after a fire. Many chaparral shrubs have large root systems that help them find water during the dry season. When everything above ground burns down, the roots are still alive. So shrubs like this one can regrow from just the stump that's left above ground after a fire. Why don't we look this plant up in our key? Adenostoma fasciculatum is commonly known as chamise. After a fire, chamise can send up stump sprouts that grow a foot or more in that first year. Plants that have underground storage parts, like bulbs or tubers, can grow back from those parts after a fire. Many plants in the lily family, like the Mariposa lily, grow back from bulbs. What else is underground? Seeds of many annual plants that were dropped in years past. Some of these require fire or other disturbance to germinate. Why would they evolve such a trait? Well, imagine how hard it must be for a little seedling to grow underneath all those shrubs. When there's a fire, though, the shrubs are all gone. These annuals have a great opportunity to get the sunshine to themselves now. To make sure that they take full advantage of the situation, a lot of the seeds of these annuals require either the smoke or the heat from fire to start growing. Actually, a lot of shrubs do this too. Their seedlings are just as small as the annuals and can use the extra sunlight they'd get from not having the shrub canopy above. Ceanothus seeds need the heat from fire before they can start to grow. It's not just native plants that take advantage of the clearings created by fire. Lots of exotic annuals, like these grasses, grow after fires and often outcompete the native plants. Oh wow, this little plant is new here. I don't think we've seen anything like this in our reserve for 20 years. Do you think we'll find it in our key? Try again. Papaver californicum is called the fire poppy. As its name implies, this poppy only grows immediately after fires. Its seeds can lay dormant in the soil for years waiting for a fire. So plants in the chaparral expect fire to ravage the landscape at regular intervals. Some plants, like the little fire poppy, wouldn't grow back without fire. Here's a patch of annual wildflowers taking advantage of a burn clearing. They wouldn't grow nearly as well with a lot of shrubs overhead. Why don't we look these plants up in our key? No? Try again. It certainly does look like Lupinus nanus. But what about the pink one? It looks like the same plant, but the key doesn't say anything about these lupins being pink. Let's bring some of the pink-flowered plants back to the lab to find out more.
I'm a scientist at La Ventura, and I study these lupins. The pink-flowered lupins are a rare variant of the normal blue-flowered ones. Let's go back to the lab to find out more. First, let me explain how lupins make more lupins. In a flower, there is a female organ called a pistil. The pistil holds ovules. The ovules mature to become seeds. The tip of the pistil is sticky. This tip is called the stigma. Flowers also have male organs called stamens. Stamens have anthers at their tips. These anthers contain a yellow powder called pollen. The male gamete in the pollen has to get from the anther to the stigma in order to fertilize the female gamete in the ovule. The ovule then grows into a seed. These lupins self-pollinate. When the flower is mature, some of the stamen's anthers touch the stigma, so the flower pollinates itself. The offspring plants, or progeny, will have only one parent. But we can remove the anthers from a flower before they're mature. This way, the flower's stigma won't be touched by its own pollen. Then we can take the pollen from the anthers of a different plant and pollinate the stigma. If we collect the pollen from one plant and place it on the stigma of another plant, we know who the parents of the resulting seeds are. Let's try it ourselves. We're going to cross some of these plants to see how the pink color is inherited. Drag 2 plants from the left to the letters on the right to perform a cross. Interesting. When we cross blue and pink, all the progeny are blue. What happened to the pink? The blue color must have covered up the pink. We call the blue color dominant over the pink color. We call the pink color recessive. Flower color is an example of a phenotype, or a physical characteristic. The color of a plant's flowers is determined by its flower color genes. Every plant has 2 copies of every gene, one from the ovule and one from the pollen. Therefore, each plant must get its flower color genes from its parents. In our experiment, we are looking at one particular flower color gene. This gene must have 2 different variations, leading to blue flowers and pink flowers. We call these variants alleles. We need to name the gene we're investigating. Usually, we name a gene after the less common variation. In this case, it's pink. We show which variation is dominant by designating it with a capital letter. In this case, we name the gene P for pink, so the pink allele is lowercase, or little p, and the blue allele is uppercase, or big P. Let's try a few more examples. Match the allele letter to the correct phenotype. If we have a California poppy mutant that is white-flowered, and we cross it with a regular orange-flowered poppy, we get orange-flowered poppies. Name the gene. Which is dominant? Dwarf lupins are a mutation of the regular lupin. When we cross a dwarf with a regular lupin, we get regular lupins. Name the gene. Which is dominant? Remember, in the wild, this lupin self-pollinates, so each plant only has one parent that contributed both pollen and ovule. If the original plants each have two identical copies of the P allele from their one parent, what P alleles do each of these parental plants have? These combinations are called genotypes. Since the original plants have two identical P alleles, we call them homozygous for P. Let's go back to the crosses we did and see if we can figure out what their genotypes and phenotypes are. Drag the P alleles from the parents to the progeny, then drag the correct flower color to the plant. When a plant has two different alleles for a gene, we call it heterozygous for that gene. The plants that were the progeny of big P cross little p are heterozygous for P, but you can't tell that from looking. They still have blue flowers, just like the big P parent, because the big P allele is dominant. We can look at the genotypes of a cross using a diagram called a Punnett square. To make a Punnett square, we put the genotypes of each parent along the x-axis and the y-axis. We can fill in the diagram by matching up the alleles that correspond to each cell. This diagram shows all the possible genotypes the progeny of a parental cross can have, based on the genotypes of the parents. In the experiments we've done so far, the progeny have all had the same genotype. No matter which parental alleles we choose, there's only one possible combination for all of the progeny. But what if we let the big P little p plants self-pollinate? This means we'll do a big P little p and big P little p cross. Roll over this Punnett square to fill in the cells. Based on the results of the first crosses you did, what phenotype corresponds to each of these genotypes? Drag a flower color to each genotype. If you don't remember, look them up in your notebook. So, 3/4 of the progeny of big P little p cross big P little p are blue, and 1/4 are pink. Does this mean that if the cross resulted in exactly 4 plants, that 3 would have blue flowers and 1 would have pink flowers? No. Remember, Punnett squares show you all the possible genotypes a cross can have. Think of it this way. We take these 4 genotypes and put them in a hat. For each child plant, we pick a random genotype out of the hat. Now you try it. Click on the hat to choose a random genotype. That's the genotype of a new child plant. As you can see, while 25% of the possible genotypes from the Punnett square lead to pink plants, when we make child plants randomly, we probably won't get exactly 25% pink plants. If we kept going and made even more child plants, we'd probably get closer and closer to 25% pink. Okay, let's see what you've learned. Here are two blue-flowered plants. One is Big P, the other is Big P, but we don't know which one is which. Since we don't know their genotypes, we've designated their alleles with question marks. Let's cross both with a Big P and a little p plant. Using the results of your crosses, can you figure out which one is Big P and which is Big P? This is called a test cross. You can always tell a heterozygote from a homozygote by crossing them with a homozygous recessive. Good job! You've learned about how traits, like the pink flowers, are inherited.
Welcome back. Now, where were we?